But we have to spend some time figuring out, like, why are you here? Because all that's happened, right? And this is the entire process, is all that's happened.
All right, we're here with another great episode and a great podcast. I am so excited to get into this. You guys are going to love Sergio, by the way. Here are some questions I have for him. And some of the things that are on my heart and my mind after looking at some of his stuff. I actually haven't had a chance to get to know Sergio a lot so far, so we're going to get to know Sergio together here. So here are some questions. What do you do when you're a professional success, but a personal failure? And what are the 4 domains we need to focus on so we can really seek it out and have it all in our lives as men and have a strong masculine essence across all 4? And another one that I'm excited that Sergio is going to dive into is how do you compress time and speed up the path to success? So a little bit about Sergio Nazzaro. He's an Air Force veteran and a performance coach who's on a mission to helping entrepreneurs have it all in their business, their health, and their relationships. So Sergio, thank you so much for being here, man. It's an honor to meet you.
Thanks, Andrew. I appreciate you having me on, man. That was quite the intro.
Yeah, so I mean, you have an interesting story. I feel a little bit about like where you have come from and kind of what's gotten you here, and like the Reader's Digest on your backstory, man.
Yeah, listen, it's been a ride, and sometimes I like to gloss over this story. I don't want to tell the whole thing, but the reality is I think it's important to know where I've come from in order to figure out like where we're all going to go together. And so I was born in New Jersey, as a good Italian is always born in New Jersey. And, as a kid, I was getting bullied a lot, right, for just being smaller and the way I was. But I was also causing a lot of shit. So it's not surprising that I was getting into some trouble. We ended up moving to Texas because that's where my mom's from. And down there is when things got a little spicy in my life. So I was about 11 years old, and it was the first time that I watched my dad cry and watching my mom console my dad. And it was because a real estate agent had given my dad some bad advice. And because of that advice, both of my parents were fired from their jobs. We ended up without a home, and we were homeless for 3 months, which was what brought us here to Colorado. That's where I'm from. But that storyline really kind of started to set up everything, and it's what motivated me to be here, right? What ended up happening out of that is like I watched my parents try to recover from that. And because they weren't able to afford college, my dad was working all these jobs just to make ends meet. My mom was working, and so they were part of our lives, but they were also absent a lot of the time. And as I headed into my final year of high school, I had one option, right? My parents weren't going to pay for college, so I tried to get into the Air Force Academy. And because I knew it was my only ticket out of my hometown. And so I took the SAT 9 times, didn't get the scores I needed. I was the last person admitted into the Air Force Academy, finally got in there because I had felt a calling right after 9/11 to serve something that was much larger than me. Graduated from there, served in the military for 6.5 years. And I ended up getting out of the military after my deployment to Afghanistan. I was there for about 7.5 months. And it was out of getting out of that things went from not only just being spicy in my life to I ended up being in the fucking darkest pit of my life. 2015, I got back from my deployment in 2013, went through a breakup in 2015, and it was in that moment that I realized I was struggling with PTSD pretty bad, right? Like a lot of suicidal thoughts. I ended up abusing drugs and alcohol to just try to sedate and figure shit out. I was making $24,000 a year and $12,000 in credit card debt. And I was just like at rock bottom. Like I just didn't want to be here. And yet that was the catalyst that kind of sparked me into getting my shit together and trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And so I ended up becoming a real estate agent. And I never thought that would happen. But I ended up doing that. And along that road, ended up having a heart attack at 34 because of the stress that came along with it. And that stressor led to a lot of fighting with my wife. We canceled our wedding. And that led to a lot of therapy, additional therapy. And now as I stand here in front of you, I've realized that there is a lot of pain that when it goes unaddressed prevents us men from being the actual man we're supposed to be. And it wasn't until I acknowledged all that pain and all that suffering and all that stress and simply just accepted that version of myself that I was able to really step into who I am as an individual. And that's when my calling truly came, to start to lead other men and women to become the best versions of themselves and have it all in their life, no matter how old they are or what chapter or season of life that they're in.
Now, I was watching your TikTok, and one of the things that you had said is that you were kind of thriving from a professional standpoint, but your personal life was a bit in shambles. I was wondering if you could kind of like expand on maybe that section of your story and how that transformation happened from more like a kind of like a before and after snapshot.
Yeah. I met my wife in 2016. We both just gotten out of a relationship, and it was the one I had just mentioned to you, right? So I was still coming out of this dark fucking pit trying to figure things out. And I then decided, this isn't stressful enough. Let me also become an entrepreneur. Let me start my own business. And, that doesn't seem stressful at all. And so what ended up happening is I was giving everything that I had into my business, right? Because this, like, as you start to create something, it takes a lot of time and effort and focus on your part. And so those stressors, because for the first 7 months of, being a real estate agent, I made $0. I wasn't making any money. And that stress, along with the natural stressors of a relationship, started to boil over. And my wife and I had gotten engaged, and yet we were fighting like crazy. And these were knockdown, drag out fights, right? And like things were being said that were super hurtful. There was one moment, right, where I grabbed my wife, and I've never hit a woman, and I would never hit a woman, but I scared myself in that moment. And so like I'm looking at my business, and like if you were to just look at that part of my life, like things were going really well, right? In my first year, I won Rookie of the Year in my company. And then from each year after that, I became the top 1% of real estate agents in Denver, in Colorado. And all of that's great, right? I'm making phenomenal money. I'm setting up my life, right? I'm a professional success. But if you look and peel behind the curtain and look at my relationship with my wife, like we're fighting all the time. My health is just deteriorating, right? I'm having a heart attack, for God's sakes, right? My relationships with my parents and my family, they're like, hey, dude, you're in the room, right, physically, but you're not in the room mentally. And so it was just this point where I got there. I was like, how did this happen? And so that's when I started to make the decision that I was like, listen, I can't just focus and become just focused on my health and fitness in my business and then neglect my relationship with the people that I say I love the most. And so I ended up finding a coach. And it was in that I had to slow things down, and I had to get out of that hustle and grind culture and figure out, like, what do I want? Like, I'm living a life of default, and I want to create and curate my life so that I'm living it and it's like supporting the way I wanted to live. And so now when I look at my life, right, like my wife and I were thriving. We just had our kid. He's almost a year old. It's hard to believe that happened. But like we're on the back end of like a complete shitstorm, and we're still learning a lot from each other. But we've really come together. And so now as I look at my life, right, like my health and fitness is great. My business is thriving. Our relationship is getting deeper, right? And because of all that, my business is starting to take off. And so I think it's just in a different spot. It's been a different approach.
So you had started something when you started out that story of seeking stress, and that kind of set off something in my brain of why do you think as men we like to seek out stressful situations almost intentionally?
Yeah. I think there's a level of value that we put on that, right? Like we believe that if we are able to put ourselves in a stressful situation and overcome it, that has value to it, that our value is dictated from that. I also think that in any state of expansion and growth, like you want to put yourself in a stressful situation to see what you're made of, right? Like there is this part of like, if you want to grow and live into your potential and you want more for your life, there are going to be stressors that are either forced upon you, right? Or you're going to choose them. And the ones that are forced upon you, right, tend to look like health issues, divorce, problems with your kids, right? All that type of stuff. And the ones that you choose can also look like divorce, health issues, and all of that, right? But it's by design that you're choosing it because you either want more, right? Or what you have is something that you're just like, hey, this ain't working. There's got to be something different. And so I think a lot of times people seek out those stressors because they want change.
I think it's like there's a guy named Garrett White, and he talked about this cycle of self-sabotage or something. I think that's what it was called.
Yeah.
And he shared it really resonated with me over the last 10 years of how there's these cycles of a man and what we're, especially the entrepreneurial man, where we almost intentionally put ourselves in situations that are stressful or maybe even borderline self-masochism, and working towards these goals and challenges and that kind of stuff, or just throwing your grenade into our life just to like start all over again because we did it once. It was exciting when we did it, and now we're bored kind of where we're at, or we're not super fulfilled, or we're just maybe scared of pushing ourselves past that point of we don't have the inner belief that we can get there. I mean, what advice would you have for a guy kind of going through that cycle? I mean, is that a cycle you're familiar with, seen it before, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I've lived it. I think there's this idea, there's this concept, right, of like, are you creating out of lack or out of abundance? Right? Because when you're creating out of lack, then you're constantly looking for the next thing. Because you get to a spot where things are working well, and then you get into this either boredom or burnout, right? Garrett talks about that, boredom or burnout. And it's the same candle that you burn on both ends. And boredom can look a lot like you're living a life that's in a rut. And so you choose to find stress to get yourself out of that. And then on the other side, you have burnout, right? Where people are just pushing so hard that they inevitably lead to burnout, and then they burn their lives to the ground. And what I think is interesting about the stressful situation is like when you're choosing it because you're trying to be in a state of expansion and you want more in your life and you believe that there is more, right? That's one thing. But when you're choosing it simply to sedate and not look at the other issues in your life, right? And so now you're just trying to mask all the shitty parts of your life with this new stressor that you're putting in. I feel like that's where a lot of men fall into because, we feel confident about ourselves when we're accomplishing. And so we want to find something new that we can do when in reality, like when you're in this cycle, you have to understand, like, are you doing it because you're trying to expand, or are you doing it because you're trying to sedate?
Or distract, right?
Yeah.
I think that we stick with where your body's like, your mind is designed to like seek out comfort zones, right? And seek out things that you're good at or have had a history of success in, or have gotten you the things that you value, right? But if you value money, you'll continue to invest time, energy into that. And I wonder, so I like the topic of creating out of lack versus creating out of lack of abundance, but it might not be super apparent to a person saying, oh, well, I'm creating out of lack, because I don't think that's something that you would necessarily be self-aware of enough when you're there. And you've kind of alluded to some of the symptoms of creating out of a lack, but I wonder if you could just spend a few moments there just spinning a story of like, if you're this is who you are if you're creating out of lack right now from your either personal experience or an experience you've seen in other men.
Yeah, there's this, I've always felt like I wasn't enough. I've always felt like I have had my back against the wall and I had to fight my way out of it. And that came from the story that I told you in the beginning, watching my parents have financial stressors would put my back against the wall. And so I had to fight my way out of it. I was in a state of like, shit, there's nothing else here. I have to build, I have to create because I don't have any other options. And so there's that aspect. And then there's this other part where, I'm 5'6", so I'm not the tallest guy in the world. But I say that because like, there's always been this thing where like, hey, I've never seen myself as small, but I've always felt like I've had to prove myself. Like I had a chip on my shoulder. Like people would always doubt me. People would always tell me that I was like either too loud or too intense or too much, right? And so like there's all these things, and so then you have like this chip on your shoulder, and you're like, well, you can go fuck yourself, and I'm going to show you why, and I'm going to put my foot on your throat to show you why I'm better than you, right? And so it's this competition, and you're driving yourself, right? And you're building because you feel like you have something to prove, and you feel like you're not enough, so you're trying to find something that's going to fill the void. And the reality is that's going to be a never-ending battle because you're going to feel like you've arrived. It happened to me. I felt like I arrived, right, in building my real estate business, and I simply arrived to a fucking place I didn't want to be at. So then what happens? Now my back's against the wall, and now I'm building out of lack again because I don't want to be here. I chased the wrong thing. And so I think a lot of times it looks like competition. A lot of times it looks like comparison. A lot of times it looks like you have something to prove to everybody else. And I don't want to discredit the ability to build out of lack. Like if you can master that and then be aware enough of it, that is a really powerful skill set. But you can't live like that forever because you're going to burn out, and you're going to burn out everything in your life along with it.
I think that is something that resonates with pretty much every man I've ever talked to, of the not feeling like you're enough and trying to continue to prove that. But that's where I think a lot of men have lost their, I don't know, I want to say mojo in this particular topic of, especially for attracting women. Whether you're in a relationship or not in a relationship, the feeling like she is being led in the relationship and feeling like she's being pursued in the relationship. And I think that's something, especially for my past journey, like that resisting that, that's where Resistingbeta came from, that wiring that from my upbringing on how I was raised and how a lot of men are raised, where they're not necessarily taught what it means to be a man or what it means to provide or what it means to truly lead yourself, and then which would allow you to lead in your relationship and in your company and all that stuff. So what would you say to the man who looks at you and say, hey, this guy's next level. He's been in the military, super ripped guy, successful in business. That's not me. So, I'm just wired different. What would you say to a guy like that who's having that narrative in his mind right now?
Yeah, listen, I think these stories I appreciate you sharing your past, right? About that. And I think there's these stories that take root in us, and then we accept them as truth. And I used to do the same thing. Listen, I left out all the parts, right? I just gave you the fucking highlight reel, but let's peel that shit back, right? I turned 18 and I started losing my hair, right? By 19, I was 55 pounds overweight. I'm 5'6". I was clocking in at 192. I don't know if you guys know this, but women don't really look at short, balding guys who are overweight and being like, yeah, I want to have sex with that dude, right? And so there came a point, right, where I realized I was putting all of my value in what other people thought of me, right? If I didn't get the external validation from somebody else, I felt less. And so that can create this storyline in your head of I'm not enough, right? And the reality is I started working out and spent some time in it, right? And then I took care of my hair issues, but I spent some time in it, and it was one of those things where it wasn't just an overnight thing, Andrew. It took time, right? Because you start to lose weight and you start to look better, but those emotions and those feelings, those are still going to be there, right? There's still a void there that you have to deal with. And I think it's simply accepting that part. Hey, I don't like this version of me. I don't like the way I look. I don't like the way I'm showing up in my relationships, right? I don't like the way that I'm treating my kids, all of that. And I think it's simply just acknowledging the parts that you don't like and knowing that is part of you right now. But you also have a choice to start to make some decisions and rewrite those stories so that the narrative you're telling yourself doesn't dictate your future forever. And so part of this journey for me and I'm still in this fucking work, is yeah, you're oh, he's got it together and he's in shape. This podcast is going to go off, And later on today, my insecurities somewhere will come up and I have to face them head on. It doesn't end. It's simply this process of understanding that, okay, cool. This is just part of who I am now. And if I don't want it to be, I do have an opportunity to change it by simply rewriting the story for myself.
So I think you're walking through the levels of self-awareness, right? To where it's like, first you have to acknowledge there's a problem, and that problem is not liking something about your current circumstances, whether it be how you look, how you feel, how much money you make, or whatnot. So when a man is at that key component of not liking those things, how do you get over that state of overwhelm when there are so many things that you don't like? Because it seems like the health and wellness world or the personal development world gives you the 75 hard of these 8 things you need to do every single fucking day. And if you don't do these things, you're a failure. And we're setting these men up for failure because the system isn't designed for most people. I mean, how can a guy kind of look past some of these miracle pill fire hose strategies and really kind of sequence their way to not liking themselves, to getting some quick wins, to moving towards that life of abundance?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a lot of it starts with first figuring out, like, what do you want? Like, we got to get clear on that. And if you can't get clear on exactly what you want, I think it takes some time to write those things down and figure those things out. Like, what do you want your body to look like? Right? And then why do you want that? What do you want your relationship with yourself to look like? Why do you want that? What do you want your relationship with your spouse and your kids to look like? Okay, why do you want that? Like, what do you want your sex life to look like? What do you want your business to look like? Why do you want that? And so I think there's this point where you have to establish what you want, not what you don't want. Everybody's really great at saying that, but like, what do you want? And then there's this other aspect, right? The other side of this process, like, okay, well, where are you? Like, no bullshit. No lies. Like, where are you today? Are you overweight? Right? Do you have a dad bod? Are you insecure about it? Are you not having sex with your wife because she doesn't like the way you look or the way you show up? Right? Are you on the verge of divorce? Is your business about to fail? Like, be real and honest with yourself, because you have to have that foundation no matter how much it hurts to accept that. Because it's in the acceptance of that you're starting to build the foundation for your future. And that's the really hard part. Is like, I'm not saying accept it to where, hey, I'm accepting it and this is how it's going to be. Just accept that that's where you're at. And so once you have where you're at, and then you're starting to get a little bit of clarity on where you want to go, then it's really about like the smallest steps possible that you can start to create for yourself that's going to move you in the right direction. It's not about doing 75 hard. Maybe it's about drinking more water and going for a walk to get in shape, right? It's not about meditating 30 minutes a day and becoming a monk, right? Maybe it's just creating a little bit of silence so that you can hear yourself. It's not about going from not having sex with your wife to having sex with her every single day. Maybe it's you writing like a love note or planning a date night. And so I think where we get lost is we think we have to go from 0 to 100. When the reality is like, that's always going to be failure. And so how do we figure out like, what's the next smallest step that we can take? And how do we turn that next step into a habit that then can change how we operate as a man?
Yeah, because I think that, I love that you mentioned that stuff, because there's a man in my men's group who's been divorced for about a year. His ex-wife cheated on him. And we were talking about him getting kind of back on the horse because he hasn't really dated much. And he kept coming up with these excuses. He's like, first I got to get in shape, and then I got to do this, and then I got to do this. And I looked at it, I was like, no, you don't.
Right?
All you have to do is this. And like, what are some 3 basic things that he could have done? And we walked him through that. It's like, okay, what's the one thing that you can control here? You just got to get the reps in, because you're not practicing at the given moment. And if you're not practicing, if you were to have met the woman of your dreams, you wouldn't be ready for her, because you haven't practiced. You haven't invested the reps. You haven't put yourself outside your comfort zone over and over. And, just like you're working out. The reasons why your muscles grow is because you rip them a little bit whenever you lift weights, and then it heals and it becomes stronger, and you just keep doing that over and over. We get that from a fitness standpoint, but from, in this circumstance, the relationship standpoint, he wasn't doing the reps. He was so worried about X, Y, and Z. I was like, okay, well, what if you just, I don't know, messaged 3 people this week? Is that a win that you can that we can celebrate together? And just having those little baby step moments. But the problem is that these little baby step moments aren't sexy on social media. They're not going to be celebrated on Instagram. No one's going to be like, oh my God, it's amazing that you wanted a 20-minute walk today. I'm so impressed. But it's so hard to get out of that external validation of I call it the Labrador Retriever complex, to where we are almost trained as men to go get the ball and bring it back and wait for the pat on the head that you're a good boy. And we're so driven by that, who's a good boy? Who's a good boy moment from our moms, from our dads, and then we pass that on to our spouses, and it creates this really crappy relationship with ourselves because we're always seeking outside, right? How did you make that transition for you? I'm sure it's a daily struggle, is like for all of us, of not being run by external validation, but like how have you started to make a shift in that transformation in your life over your journey here?
Yeah, you made a really great point. It's not the sexy work, and I was in therapy for 2.5 years by myself, right? And I would come out of that crying for an hour, and I would write in my journal about what came up. In fact, I just looked at those things the other day, and I was in a dark spot, but the beauty of it is I was just doing the reps. I was going twice a week for almost 2 years because I had to get out of it. And so in that, I started to get to know myself a lot better. And I think there is this part that I've come to realize, that your relationship with yourself is one of the most important, if not the most important. No, it is the most important relationship that you have. And so in order to build the confidence in yourself, you have to get to know you, right? You have to spend the time getting to know you. And so I've always seen myself where I would put people on a pedestal, coaches, mentors, sometimes women, I would put them on a pedestal. And all that did was create this weird fucking dynamic where I was looking up at them, they were looking down at me. And so now there was this power struggle. And I got to the spot where I was like, you're no different than I am, right? As a coach and as a mentor and as somebody that inspires me, it's you're just a fucking guy, or you're just a fucking girl. You might be at a different chapter in your life, but we're fucking equals here. And so I would spend a lot of time, and I still spend time every single day, right, in meditation, connecting with myself, and then spending time journaling, getting those thoughts out, those feelings out. Why are these stories coming up? Why do I feel insecure about posting this video? Why do I feel insecure about getting on this podcast with Andrew? Where the fuck is that coming from? And so it's in getting to know these stories and exploring that, that you get to know yourself. And I think it's in that once you know who you are as an individual, what you're capable of, what you stand for, then the external validation, the need for it, starts to degrade a lot. And so if you were to leave this and you're like, man, Sergio's kind of a fucking asshole, I'd be like, that's your decision, that's your choice, but I know who I am, and I know I'm not. And it's because I know who I am, and yet I have no clue who I am, because I'm still learning and revealing that, and that's the work that you have to do all the time to continue to grow and expand, get to know yourself, and maintain that confidence.
Yeah, I think that this know yourself and know your why and know the what is where a lot of people get stuck, where they're at because the narratives in their mind are kind of keeping them there, right? Because they're frustrated, and then they focus on the frustration points to where it's like, I'm fat, being fat makes me sad, I'm sad, so I'm going to eat because food makes me happy. It's like that fat bastard moment from Austin Powers, you know, where he's like, he just keeps eating and keeps making him fat. I forget the exact quote, but especially after a lot of the men might be on the verge of divorce. So I went through a divorce, or if you lose a business or a career change, or we're in the middle of a recession right now, depending on who you listen to. So there's going to be some identity shifts here, and whenever you go through an identity shift, you kind of lose that sense of self. Or when you're what you used to identify yourself, like for me, I used to be a married man with a business. At the time I owned my own digital marketing agency. I lost the business. I was no longer a married man, and then I was now single. So all of these new variables, like, okay, I used to use my values of my parents, and then I had shared values with my ex-wife, who now I don't agree with any of them because I was a people-pleasing kind of spineless type man, where I was like, oh, whatever she wants, because if she doesn't get what she wants, then she'll leave me.
Yeah.
So I'll just give her everything, and I'll be a chameleon man that just blends into whatever scenario or situation I'm in, so I can give the other person what I think that they want.
Do you think that's why she left you?
I think it is one of the reasons why we're divorced. It was more of a joint discussion. Gotcha. But it was one of the key reasons why she built resentment towards me. And most women cannot put a finger on why they don't want to have sex with their husband or be with him. They're just vaginas all tightened up and dry as can be, because like they're just, the man has, well, for myself, I had lost my ability to lead in that relationship, and it took, unfortunately, a very painful experience that I wouldn't wish on anybody, but it was something that I led and I initiated, and eventually she finalized it. But it was that moment of, okay, first I need to necessarily burn it down, and be a good ender in a relationship that no longer served me and who I want to become and grow towards. And figuring out, like, testing these little micro tests of, like, who am I? What do I want? And most of the men, I would guess, if I asked you right now, what do you want? I'd get I don't know, this, type response. And that just tells me that they haven't spent enough time having mission-based questions for themselves. Like, what is your mission as a man? What are you trying to accomplish? Why? All of these questions that are super important to position yourself in a masculine energy, to understand who you are as a human being, what you are going to do on a given day, yeah, and how to move forward. So, I'm so happy that we've gone down this little rabbit hole here, and I'm
Andrew, to your point, right? Like, there's society telling you that being masculine is not okay now. That toxic masculinity, that simply being a man, being direct, being over the top, being intense, leading is not okay.
Mm-hmm.
And that's bullshit. I'm not saying that women shouldn't rise, right? Like, my wife is rising as an individual, and I love her for it. My sister is. My mother has. There's plenty of women that I work with that have. But if you don't allow men to rise, if you do not allow them to step into who they are and lead, right? If you keep trying to emasculate them, then there's no purpose for them. And they're going to feel that. And in that, you're going to wonder why, like, women are going to wonder why they don't want to have sex with their husband. It's going to be simple as that. And then these marriages are going to fall apart. And in that, right now, we're left with a data point. Because we know that 75% of the mass shootings that have happened, the shooters came from broken homes. This is a large thing. And so you can't just say that masculinity is the problem, right? It's the absence of masculinity that is the problem. And so to your point, men need to know who they are. They need to be able to lead themselves. And if they're not there, then it's simply just a data point for them to understand I have a moment to change my life forever.
Yeah, I think that the masculinity is just a word, right? But I almost strip it down one step lower of a duty, mission, purpose. I mean, I'm listening to the 10X book right now, and he talks about success is my duty and obligation. And it's more in an entrepreneurial standpoint. But those words of duty and mission, I mean, as a former military guy, I'm sure those are drilled into you. You hear those words when you sleep at night. But for people who haven't been in the military, that those words of duty and mission are mission statements for a company or whatever. They don't necessarily mean a whole lot. Mm-mm. And the less you invest the time in putting these reps of what does this actually mean for you as a man, for your family, for your kids, for your future relationship, for your current relationship. And that's where the roots of masculinity start to take hold. When you have those deep roots, if there are storms of your life, if you don't have them, then life will just rip it out, root and stem.
Yep.
Right? So I'm getting to a point here. So how can coaching help men build these roots? From your experience, you've shared a little bit about your coach, and I'm kind of curious on your systems that you teach to help men establish these roots, uncover their own masculine essence or energy or whatever the hell you want to call it.
Right.
And start to take action on some of the stuff that we talked about today.
I think there's this part that comes back to simply stop fucking lying and tell the truth to yourself. Garrett is one of my coaches, right? I've told you, Warrior has been in there, and I'm in it. And that's become my mission, is to get in front of men and women for this and lead them through it. And so I think that the simple version of this, to really boil it down, is it's going to take a daily investment on your part in yourself, right? In your health, in yourself, in your relationships with who you are, exploring that. What are the stories that are limiting you? What are the patterns that are no longer serving you? We have to get clear on some of those things, right? And then it really starts again with what do you want? What do you want in this life? Why are you here? Let's just sit with that. And I'll ask, right? Why are you here? And men will be well, I don't know. Cool. That's not an answer. I mean, it is an answer, but we have to spend some time figuring out, why are you here? Because all that's happened, right? And this is the entire process, is all that's happened is at some point, something happened. Something was said, an experience occurred that made you forget who you are. And all we're trying to do is reveal more of who you are by identifying what you want, where you're at, and then doing the work every single day, the not sexy work, the work that nobody wants to do, right? The meditation, the journaling, right? The exploration of you, all of that. To figure out simply what do you want and where do you want to go. And it's not anything sexy. It's a day-to-day thing, every single day.
So when men are stuck at I don't know, what advice do you give them?
What makes you happy? Let's just get there. If you could make your life look the way you wanted it to look, what does your marriage look like? And we start to ask questions, right? Tell me about when you first met your wife. Why did you choose her? And they usually start to talk about hey, we would go on dates. We would go do fun things, right? They start to just open up a little bit because they forgot what it was like. Cool. How often are you guys having sex? Once or twice a year. Cool. If you could change that, what would it look like? What would having sex 2 to 3 times a week look like for you if that's what they wanted? And so they start to talk through these things, right? And it's just simply like holding up a mirror and asking some questions. Like, when did you feel the most confident in your body? Right? Usually it goes back to, I was playing sports in high school, or I was playing sports in college. I liked the way I looked. I liked the way I felt. I liked what I was capable of. So at some point there is a piece of information where they know what it looks like, what they want, but they forgot about it. And through a series of questions, like, we start to figure out what they want. Because a lot of times, I don't know if you know, maybe you probably do, right? Like, you have this massive thing happen to you. And then if I was asked, well, what do you want in a relationship? You're like, I don't fucking know. I just got out of one, right? Like, how am I supposed to know? Mm-hmm. And so when you can't do it yourself, that's when you enlist somebody else to come in and start to ask some of the questions, hold up your past, give you the opportunity and the space to say what you want, guide you through it, pull you through it. And I think it's really allowing you to get in front of people and start to listen to what they're saying. Because when you talk to me, if you start to ask like what I want in my life, there's things that you're going to hear, you're going to pull on, because you've obviously done a great job on this podcast leading it, right? There's nuggets that you're going to pick up on that they may gloss over, and that's where you go in. Then you start to ask the hard questions.
Man, I want to just take a second to encourage the men listening to this. I'll speak to you for a second. I want to challenge you to not only ask yourself, but pick a brother, pick a man in your life who you care about, and ask them. And then just see where it goes. And just keep asking of like, why? Like, why is that important? Or what's preventing you? Or tell me about a time when. Because I think that as we get older, we have a much harder time doing things where we feel silly, or we feel we might look stupid, or we're just not good at. So we just stop doing them, right? So I think in our 20s, we spent a lot of time just fucking things up because we don't really know any different. And this is what we do all the time. We just make a bunch of damn mistakes. But as we get older, we are more reluctant to just try new things. So maybe you just pull a George Costanza and you just do opposite of what you're currently doing, right? Just have a solid opposite day of, okay, well, this is the results I'm getting. What if I acted, what could I do that would be exactly opposite of what I'm doing? Maybe I'll try that, because a lot of times in life, you know what you don't want. So just try a bunch of stuff out and figure out what you don't like or what you don't want or whatever. And maybe you'll get some different results, right? Because if you don't have the clarity right now, and if you don't necessarily know what you want, the worst thing you could do right now is do nothing. Mm-hmm. Like, just sit where you're at. Sit in mediocre, sit in okay, sit in blah, sit in good enough. That's the worst possible thing that you could do. Because without momentum comes depression as men, in my experience. Without progress comes depression. If you're not living, you're dying. If you're not working on your relationship or your marriage, you're working on your divorce or the death of that relationship. If you're not working on the relationship with yourself, you're working on the kind of the death of yourself, I guess. That one doesn't quite stick as much, but still.
I think to your point though, right? It's boredom or burnout. And men will burn their lives to the ground for either one. If they're bored in their relationship, they're going to cheat. If they're burning out in their relationship, it's going to lead to divorce because they're neglecting their spouse, right? Mm-hmm. If they're burning out in their relationship with their kids, right, they're going to become distant. If they're if they're bored with their kids, right, it's all about the relationship and how you look at it. And like, burnout and boredom are super dangerous. Mm-hmm. And boredom usually comes from being good enough. And burnout comes from not being aligned with what you're trying to accomplish, because you would never jeopardize it if you actually knew what you wanted.
Man, that's a mic drop moment. So I want to transition there. And man, I would probably pause here and then just go back 3 minutes and listen to what Sergio just said, because I think there's a lot of gold there and pretty much everything he said today. So we're all super fortunate to meet him and to be here in this moment and investing this time. So I want to honor the men listening to this right now for investing in yourself, because that's the first step. So now there's a couple questions I ask every single guest. The first one is one of my favorites. Is what does it mean to be a man to you, Sergio?
It's the full acceptance of who you are. Both the feminine side, the masculine side, the things you love, the things you hate, your ego, your lack of confidence, your confidence. Like when you can fully accept yourself, not only do you become the best version of you, but you can become the leader that you need in your life, right? Because once you fully accept yourself, you're untouchable. There's there's nothing that anybody else could do to you to bring you down. And so I think it's acknowledging that like you carry feminine energy. You also carry masculine energy. And in that, there's a beautiful harmonious relationship between the two. And when you can accept that, I think that's the true definition of masculinity.
I love that. But I think that we all have estrogen and testosterone from a biochemical standpoint in our bodies.
Yeah.
And we're all wired differently from feminine and masculine balance. And trying to be someone you're not was the main reason why I got into a marriage I shouldn't have gotten into, because I was basically faking it. My ex-wife even told me that she liked me better when I was drunk. And what she meant by that is I created this persona when we started dating that I learned about in this book called Double Your Dating by David D'Angelo. And I would act and create this different version of me, kind of this cocky, what followed the recipe they gave me. And that's how I attracted her. And we drank a lot in college, so she liked me a lot then. And then drinking, it wasn't as important to me in my life. Still is for her, but not so much for me, and was one of the divides there. But I lost my sense of self. I wasn't myself, So knowing who that authentic version of yourself is really important in my mind, and what has been in my life. So, so the men here, so I do want to give you a second, because I think that the one key component in our lives that's preventing us from the best version of ourselves is where we can't see the forest through the trees. We are so stuck in our own mind, in our own head, and we don't have that guide in our lives to ask us those hard questions where we're at, and to kind of kick us in the ass when you need a little bit of a nudge forward. So can you just share with them a little bit about your coaching, what you do with them? What would be, if they're curious in continuing this conversation with you, what they should do?
Yeah, listen, I think there's coaching has been a big part of my life. And so that's why I think that when you can't see the forest through the trees, you have to lean on somebody else to guide you there, because you can do all of this on your own. There's no doubt about it. But you're going to extend the timeline, and you're going to live in the fucking shit for way too long. You don't need to. And so my coaching program is a year long, right? It's a year commitment. And when you come in, we start with an intake form. I want to know all the things that are going well in your body, all the things that are going well with your connection with yourself and your creator, all the things that are going well, then things that are going in your relationship, and all the things that are going well and aren't in your business. So we start there. But like I mentioned earlier, it's really important. We got to identify, like, what do you want at the end of this 12 months? Like, let's get super clear on that. But we first have to start with, like, where you're at. And I think there's this part of getting into the weeds of all the shit that's not working and figuring out, well, where are things working and where are things not, and owning those things and creating the foundation and the fertile ground to build in. So we acknowledge all of that. And then from there, we start to work and to build. We give you different frameworks on how to handle managing some of these emotions. We give you different frameworks on how to build out and become more productive in your business. We give you the ability to teach you how to meditate and connect with yourself. We have prompted journals for you to get through, right? There's a lot of this stuff that we teach you, different frameworks on how you can simply implement the smallest things in your life that then become habits, and those habits build momentum, and that momentum builds the life that you're looking for. And so if it's something that any of you who have listened to this are interested in, I would just encourage you to send me a message on Instagram, Sergio.Nazzaro, and then we can find a time to do a discovery call to see if it's a good fit.
Awesome, man. I'll include all that stuff in the show notes. So the part of the episode that I like to help the men along, and I mean that we've given them a lot, so I want to just kind of create a bookend here and ask you to put your professorial hat on and give the men some action steps, some homework, some bite-sized pieces. And we've alluded to it a little bit, but I want to just circle back because we've covered a lot. What would you tell the men to do over the next 7 days where they can get some quick wins and some momentum and meet them where they're at and help them move forward? So what would that homework be that they should do every single morning for the next 7 days?
Yeah, I think it all starts with how you start your day, right? And so in my experience, moving your body is the perfect arena to learn about yourself and connect with yourself. And that doesn't have to be anything crazy. That could simply be just going for a morning walk, or if you want to go for a run or go to the gym or whatever, but build some consistency there, right? Like start something small, right? In fact, just start with a 10-minute walk. Just get on that, and then out of that walk, come back. And I like to use the Headspace app to start to do a little bit of meditation. There's guided meditation in there. Start with 5 minutes. Simply just sit in the silence and allow it to feel really fucking uncomfortable, right? Because you're going to learn some things that are coming up and your mind's going to race, and all of that is there for you. It's completely fine. So you have that 10-minute walk, and then you're going to meditate. And then I would simply just tell you, open up a Google Doc, open up your computer, or find something to write in, and then just express like the feelings that came up through the walk and the meditation. Even if it's something as simple as like, I fucking hate this. Fuck this Sergio guy for telling me to do this. Like, this is bullshit. That's good. Get that stuff down. Like, start to be really honest with yourself. Nobody else is going to read it, but get it out. And then the next day, do it again. And then the next day, do it again. And just do it for 7 days. And out of those 7 days, you're going to build a little bit of momentum. Jerry Seinfeld talks about when he writes jokes, how he doesn't want to break the chain. So he writes a joke every single day, and like he just tries not to break the chain. If you can do this for 7 days, I guarantee you're going to want to do it for 8. So start there. It doesn't have to be this crazy CrossFit workout or ultra marathon workout. Simply just take the next, that would be 30 minutes to do all of that, and watch how that impacts your day.
I love that, man. I do. I think that now you have a choice, right? You can choose to listen to that information and keep it in your brain and not do anything about it, or turn it into wisdom and start practicing these steps and just try it out. Put yourself in a situation that's a little bit uncomfortable. It's not hard. It's not sexy. But if you did it every day for the next 365, your life could change. So what do you want? So, Sergio, man, I really appreciate you being here. I'll attach you had mentioned your Instagram. You have a TikTok channel, so I'll attach those in the show notes. It's pretty simple. So you just basically put in Sergio's name and then a dot in between. You'll find him. But I'll attach it in the show notes. But I want to take a second and just honor you for the man that you are, the man that you are becoming, and the man that you have been. Because I think that it is the easy thing would have been to stay where you're at. The easy thing would have been to continue to numb who you were with substances and alcohol. And unfortunately, many men take the easy road and just numb that version of themselves because becoming something better is just it's too hard in their mind. So I want to just appreciate the fact that you haven't put in the work, put in the money, put in the resources, put in the time to put yourself in a situation where men like you are going to change the world. So I appreciate everything that you've done and who you are.
Thank you. That's very kind of you. Appreciate you having me on here too. It means a lot.
Absolutely, man. It's been a pleasure. Okay, so I'll end it there. So now I want to just do the 30-second promo. Just essentially, these people don't know who you are, so I always like to start it with a hook or a question or whatever, or you can just introduce yourself, depending on what you want to do. Be 30 seconds. Essentially, just want you to answer the question, why should men listen to this episode in the most energetic and charismatic way possible, which won't be hard for you.
You got it.
You're both of those things. So whenever you're ready.
Can you ask the question one more time?
Why should men listen to this episode?
Fellas, I need you to listen up right now. Like, stop scrolling. There is a version of you that is much greater than the one you are right now. And you know it. You know it in the depths of your soul. This episode, we talk about it. And simply just taking the time to just listen to this for a moment can put you on a completely different trajectory for your life. It can save the relationship that you have with your spouse. It can make the relationship that you have with your kids even better. It allows you to get to know who you are and what you want. It's 45 minutes. Take the time. I promise you, you will not regret it.
Love it.
Does that work?
Stop the recording. That was great, man. Oh, whoops.